CBS News Sunday Morning with Jane Pauley on CBS.
We have an inspiring story that started with a strange act of kindness.
Yeah. We found it.
You're kidding me!
We got it.
We share stories that lift you up and brighten your day.
The Uplift. Stream on the free CBS News app.
Stories that inform, inspire, and brighten your day.
I've been waiting patiently for something like this.
Make every day a little more like Sunday morning.
Here comes the sun.
Stream on the free CBS News app Tuesday mornings.
Understanding how local elections impact the entire nation by looking closely at voters' motivations and choices. Special primary election coverage on Red and Blue tonight. Stream on the free CBS News app.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us. I'm Nicole Killian, coming to you from our Washington, D.C. bureau for a special primary edition of Red and Blue.
America cannot remain free if we abandon the truth.
President Trump summoned a violent mob and directed them illegally to march on the United States Capitol.
Attorney Harriet Hageman was once a Cheney ally. But in this contest, she has embraced Trump.
We have a committee in Congress right now that they're focusing on something that happened 18 months ago. They're not focusing on the issues that are important to the people in Wyoming.
There will come a day when Donald Trump is gone, but your dishonor will remain.
Liz, you're fired. Get out of here.
They hate her. They just want her out.
She's our representative, not her own.
What she's doing right now is so important for our democracy.
Her standing up for the truth and the Constitution is what got her my vote.
One is supported by Trump and one is not supported by Trump. That is the only really distinguishing issue in the race.
Through my seniority, I get real results for our state.
Lisa wasn't originally elected to the Senate. So what has she been doing in Washington, D.C.?
Y'all know the trajectory that our country is on right now, not real good, but we can turn that around.
We start with a look at Wyoming's majestic Grand Teton National Park. It is the backdrop for voting in the state's highly contentious House GOP primary. Polls there close in about an hour. We'll be closely monitoring races in that state and Alaska. We have teams in Wyoming, D.C., and New York to help us preview tonight's primaries and break down what these results could mean on the national stage. Republican Congresswoman Liz Cheney is defending her seat against Trump-backed candidate and former Republican National Committee member Harriet Hageman. The daughter of former Vice President Dick Cheney has served in Wyoming's only congressional district since 2016. Since then, she has become one of the most vocal GOP critics of the former president. In 2021, Cheney was one of 10 House Republicans who voted to impeach him. Only 2 of those lawmakers won their primaries earlier this year. The others either lost their primaries or are planning to retire. Cheney also currently serves as the vice chair of the House Select Committee investigating the January 6th attack. In Alaska, former governor and Republican vice presidential candidate Sarah Palin is vying for the Last Frontier's only congressional seat. The state's first ever ranked choice election pits Palin against Republican businessman Nick Begich and Democratic State Representative Mary Peltola. And in the Senate, incumbent Republican Lisa Murkowski faces off against Trump-backed candidate Kelly Tshibaka. Murkowski was one of 7 GOP senators who voted to convict the former president during his second impeachment trial. And CBS News senior White House and political correspondent Ed O'Keefe joins me now on the desk to help put all of this in context. This is another big night. What are you expecting tonight?
Yeah, Nicole, good to see you. I mean, look, all of these elections are local. They're state-based. There'll be reasons why people vote for or against somebody, but they once again reflect the national trends that we've seen all across the country. If you're somebody who's backed by the former president tonight, you're probably going to do pretty well, unless you're Lisa Murkowski, because you're in a situation now that is a completely different kind of voting system in the nation's largest geographically largest state, but is somebody who has sort of been able to use her independent streak to her advantage. And that's one place where this will work tonight. In Wyoming, of course, the race we've all been waiting for really for much of this year, it does seem as if it's headed towards Liz Cheney's ouster. And, what that says about her future, about the future of the Republican Party, remains to be seen. So, it'll be an interesting night. And I think at this point it's a question of not if, but maybe by how much she loses, unless in the last few days she's convinced enough Democrats and independents to show up and vote in what is an open primary for Republicans in that state.
And so on that note, we want to bring in Robert Costa now from Jackson, Wyoming. He is CBS News chief election and campaign correspondent. Good to see you, Bob. We know that you spoke with Congresswoman Liz Cheney, who was accompanied by her father, Dick Cheney, at a polling place today. Let's take a listen to what she said.
As a country, we're facing very challenging and difficult times. We're facing a moment where our democracy really is under attack and under threat. And those of us across the board, Republicans, Democrats, and independents, who believe deeply in freedom and who care about the Constitution and the future of the country, I think have an obligation to put that above party. And I think that fight is clearly going to continue and clearly going to go on.
Seems like Cheney is playing the long game here. What is your read on how she is feeling about tonight's contest? What is the mood like there?
Nicole, Ed, great to be with you here on CBS News. What a moment here in Wyoming. And I don't regret having the assignment to be in beautiful Jackson, as you can see around me. What a piece of America right here. And what a piece of America it is politically tonight. It's a microcosm, as Ed rightly said, of what's happening politically in the country, the dynamics out there in the primary contest, especially on the Republican side. And it was also a reminder of the history that plays into those dynamics. When our CBS News team arrived at a polling place in Jackson, Wyoming, just down the street a few hours ago this afternoon, to see the former Vice President, Dick Cheney, who represented Wyoming from 1979 to 89, 2 terms with George W. Bush in the White House, to see him at this stage in his life, his later years, walk alongside his daughter, the Congresswoman, to vote in a primary election where she is poised to be defeated, though you never know in politics. But he was steadfast as he walked toward the polling place, someone who was clearly proud of his daughter, proud of the stand she has taken against former President Trump, a stand he has also taken, cutting an ad for her, calling the former president a coward. All of these things are cascading together in Wyoming in this race that is a national race in many ways because, in part, she's also eyeing a possible 2024 presidential bid, according to some of her allies.
And, Bob, in the time you've been there and in today, in addition to speaking to the Congresswoman and the former Vice President, there were other people in line, of course. What are voters telling you about why they're heading to the polls for this race? And do you get a sense that there's a groundswell of Democrats and independents who are actually showing up to help her tonight in this open primary?
Ed, there was certainly a groundswell today of Democrats switching parties to vote for Congresswoman Cheney. But there's a caveat to that statement. There was a groundswell in Jackson, Wyoming. This is a blue oasis in a ruby red state. We saw it up close today, the switching that was going on. There was a long line of Democrats alongside Congresswoman Cheney as she walked into the polling place. But across the state, this is still Trump country. And you see that when you talk to voters who are more conservative, they say they're tired of Congresswoman Cheney and her work on the January 6th committee. They would like the Republican Party to stick with Trump.
And, Bob, we know that the former president, of course, is heavily vested in this race. He has made very clear that he wants Liz Cheney out of office. If he succeeds tonight, could this strengthen his hold on the GOP, and could it take some of the attention off of some of the legal challenges he's currently facing?
Throughout the year, as we've all covered, whenever Trump wins a primary race, he likes to tout it as a sign of his political capital in the party. But we are at an uncertain moment, I would argue, as a reporter, in terms of where this all goes with the former president. He is facing legal challenges in Georgia. Tonight, some of his allies being told to come down and testify, facing legal challenges in New York, the Manhattan District Attorney, the New York State Attorney General, a congressional probe. All of these things could play into the 2024 discussion, in addition to how all of these primaries are playing out. And my motto as a reporter is assume nothing, because who knows what happens. We didn't think a few weeks ago the former president's home would be raided by FBI agents who are part of a DOJ investigation into his handling of documents, potentially highly classified documents. And so all of this is swirling around what's happening here in Wyoming, in Alaska, and other races this year.
And, you know, Bob, so much of the focus has been on the former president's influence, not only in Wyoming, but across the country. But what about House Minority Leader Kevin McCarthy? He's actually there in Wyoming as well. What role has he and House Republicans writ large played in this primary especially?
Ed, I think back to our times together covering Capitol Hill more than a decade ago. We chronicled McCarthy as he rose in the ranks. He was part of that original group, the Young Guns, with Paul Ryan and Eric Cantor. And now he's on the brink of being possibly the Speaker of the House next year, should House Republicans take over. To me, this is someone who's made a decision to be with Trump. Cheney was in the leadership. She was often talked about as someone who could be Speaker of the House one day as well. She lost her leadership post due to her clash with Trump. But, Ed, I'm curious. I mean, as someone, you know House politics better than anyone, and so does Nicole. I would love to hear your take on McCarthy, because he's out here talking to donors in Jackson, which is intriguing to say the least. But he's someone who's kind of hard to read for me in some ways about where this all goes out for him.
It is telling that they're holding this donor retreat at a place that the Cheneys once hosted an event for Donald Trump. The owners of that place have said Cheneys aren't welcome. We're happy to have Kevin McCarthy and hundreds of donors there to speak to some members and to themselves about the future of the party. It is quite something, Bob. And I do wonder, as you said, you know, how does this factor into his long game, kicking out somebody like Liz Cheney? And is this ultimately something that helps him and helps him win in November, or does it sort of hurt long term? I don't know.
And potentially bolster his chances to become Speaker if Republicans prevail. I
mean, because it's not every day, and this should be pointed out too, that a party and a campaign committee for that party essentially tells an incumbent to take a hike. Normally, by default, they're supposed to support that incumbent. They didn't do that in this case, and they actively sought a challenger to Cheney only to appease the former president. It's quite something.
Yeah, it's a pretty stunning turn of reversal. Thanks so much, Bob Costa. We want to bring in CBS News executive editor, director of elections and surveys, Anthony Salvanto, to help set the stage for tonight. Anthony, what should we be watching for in Wyoming?
Hey, good, great to talk to you. Look, let me start by setting the table, showing you just how Republican Wyoming is, because as we talk, as you all were just saying about the fights within the Republican Party, well, check this out. This is the 2020 presidential vote in Wyoming, near 70% for Donald Trump. That's about as red a two-party map as you're going to see. And in fact, if you were to look at county-by-county Republican registration, let me show you that. That's about as red a map, red for Republicans, as you're going to see. That's an entire state. It's 71% of voters who are registered as Republicans. In fact, you know, in a lot of states, you get parties that are about even with independents. This is a Republican state. So the sort of answer is, as the results come in, where do you look? You sort of look everywhere and anywhere, Nicole.
Could Democrats, I mean, I think this map of yours answers this next question to some extent. But, Anthony, I mean, could Democrats actually, and independents for that matter, help Liz Cheney in her primary tonight, given those party registration edges? I mean, we heard Bob say, for example, Jackson Hole is a blue dot in an otherwise ruby red state. Numerically, is there enough there if she somehow found them to pull this off? So
it's a great question, Ed, because that is the talk around a lot of circles. About 200,000 Republicans. There's about, 40,000 Democrats, right? So that stacks things, meaning that you have to basically win Republicans to win Wyoming. I mean, this would have to be a really, really tight race for any Democrats to actually put Liz Cheney over the top. And frankly, I think, you still have to go through a procedure to switch over and vote in that primary, which some Democrats may not be used to doing. So it wouldn't be all Democrats necessarily. So, look, we'll see what happens. But numerically, this is a battle among Republicans, Ed.
Yeah, and speaking of that, Anthony, I mean, what are you seeing from Republican voters that explains why Cheney is in such a tough fight?
Yeah, well, I'm glad you asked, Nicole. Let me show you this. Couple of things. One is so much of this turns on Republicans saying that they don't believe that Joe Biden legitimately won, okay? If a candidate says Joe Biden did not win, Republicans say they're more likely to vote for that candidate by a very wide margin over making them less likely to vote for that candidate. You see, among Republican registered voters, you get a slight majority who say they feel like they're part of the MAGA movement, right? In other words, they're real strong Trump backers. And this one really pertains to what Liz Cheney's been talking about. If a candidate criticizes what happened on January 6th, only 19% of Republicans say that makes them more likely. But look, 42%, this is nationwide, say that makes them less likely to vote for that candidate. So that puts into national context a lot of what we're seeing play out in Wyoming, Nicole.
Real quick, Anthony, before we let you go, set the expectations for viewers. How long is the count going to take tonight in Wyoming? We know in Alaska it's going to take several days, but what about Wyoming?
Yeah, historically, about half of Wyoming's vote is reported by around 11 to 11:30 p.m. Eastern. So it's not that quick. We'll obviously keep watching it, start watching it as soon as polls close at 9. But that's when you can expect, and at the decision desk, we often need about half the vote before we start really looking at a computation. Having said that, if it's a big spread, it might come a little earlier. You never know. So somewhere after 11:30, maybe by midnight, stay with us, follow me on Twitter, and we'll keep you all posted. But that's my expectation going in, Ed.
All right. Well, we'll try to stay up with you, Anthony. Thank you so much. Anthony Salvanto, our Executive Director of Elections and Surveys. We'll be right back after a break.
CBS News Sunday Morning with Jane Pauley on CBS.
You ready? A generation of kids opens up on CBS Reports.
I just want to be like a regular kid.
Their world, their struggles, their voices.
What if I was white?
A lot of people like to call names and make you feel ashamed for being proud of who you are.
Now streaming Gender.
I did not realize that you could change your gender.
Realizing how you feel.
You can be a boy, sometimes you feel like a girl, sometimes you feel like both.
Redefining who you are.
Identify as trans.
Gender fluid.
Non-binary and queer.
Is the idea of gender a thing of the past?
And to be yourself, always, no matter what anyone says, I love you.
Are the kids all right? Gender. Now streaming on the free CBS News app.
I'm Norah O'Donnell in our nation's capital. We're here at the White House with the President of the United States.
Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
You've never done an interview like this before. That's correct.
Tonight, a congressional investigation sparked by reporting from CBS News.
What's your message to consumers?
They need help now.
Tell him I feel it.
The CBS Evening News with Norah O'Donnell from Washington, D.C. on CBS and streaming on Paramount+.
We will witness yet another moment in history.
Want to go someplace new? Yeah, you do.
See something new.
Learn something new.
Meet someone new. Nate B in the house.
There's always something new under the sun.
CBS Mornings, weekdays.
When weather is about to get extreme.
We're talking about hail, we're talking about tornadoes, damaging winds.
Every second counts.
Let's now take a look at what that really means to you.
That's why CBS News and the Weather Channel have come together to bring you virtual weather technology so advanced, so real.
We can show you what it's going to look like when the storms come through.
You'll see what will happen, where it will happen, before it does. Feel the forecast on CBS News. Time to get prepared.
People from every corner of America facing challenges.
Everyone is just looking for some type of connection.
Just raise your hand and say, hey, I'd like to help.
Coming together to find solutions.
We are going to do something about it.
Their stories are our stories.
Welcome to Eye on America.
Stream now on the free CBS News app.
CBS News Sunday Morning with Jane Pauley on CBS.
We have an inspiring story that started with a strange act of kindness.
Yeah. We found it.
You're kidding me!
We God.
We share stories that lift you up and brighten your day.
The Uplift. Stream on the free CBS News app.
Stories that inform, inspire, and brighten your day.
I've been waiting patiently for something like this.
Make every day a little more like Sunday morning.
Here comes the sun.
Stream on the free CBS News app Tuesday mornings.
The midterm elections will determine more than just the balance of power in Congress and state houses across the country. They'll also give us our first nationwide read on what voters think about the U.S. Capitol attack and the baseless claims of fraud in the 2020 election. Some people making those fraud claims are on ballots in state and local races. And as congressional correspondent Scott McFarland reports, so too are some of the people who were actually in the mob on January 6th.
In the months after a mob swarmed the U.S. Capitol, some of them falsely claiming fraud in the 2020 election results in states like Arizona, Pennsylvania, and Michigan. 3 men who were in the crowd outside that day have sought high office in Arizona, Pennsylvania, and Michigan. State Representative Mark Fincham, who was outside the Capitol January 6th, is the nominee to be Arizona's top elections official, Secretary of State. Fincham claims the 2020 election was rigged and has been subpoenaed by the House January 6 Select Committee. Also subpoenaed by the committee, Pennsylvania Republican gubernatorial candidate Doug Mastriano, who the committee says was also at the Capitol January 6th and had knowledge of plans to submit a false slate of electors that day. Neither Mastriano nor Fincham is charged with a crime, but Ryan Kelly is. Kelly was a Michigan Republican gubernatorial candidate who lost on primary day but returns to court in September. He's charged with entering restricted grounds and disorderly conduct in a Capitol breach case. None of the 3 shied away from talking about January 6th on the stump. Political analysts say a connection to January 6th has helped or eventually will help some GOP candidates outflank other Republicans in their primary campaigns.
How damning can this be? Well, in a general election in a blue state, I don't think it's going to be very helpful, to say the least. But in Republican primaries, it's no wonder that it's been sort of a feather in your cap. If you were at the Capitol on January 6th, it's not going to hurt you. Now, again, in the context of a Republican primary.
Former West Virginia Republican State Delegate Derrick Evans pleaded guilty in his Capitol riot case and recently began serving a 3-month sentence in prison. He resigned his seat, but told CBS News he's considering a future run for office in his home state. West Virginia Democratic Party leaders slam Evans for his role in the Capitol breach and his suggestion of any future run. But Evans said those who voted for him in the past remain supportive.
A lot of these people shook my hand. They thought it was dumb, but they did thank me for having enough guts and backbone to stand up and represent them and make their voices heard.
There have also been local candidates charged in January 6 cases. A former Parkersburg, West Virginia city council member and a New Mexico county commissioner who tells me he expects to run again in future elections. Nicole, this isn't the last cycle. I think this dynamic's going to be true.
And I think it really raises questions about the impact that this could have not only on the current election, but future elections as well.
And I think if you win a primary against somebody who supported the January 6th committee or was somebody supportive of the investigation, you therefore have a mandate with a Republican majority next Congress to investigate the Department of Justice and take a hard line against any investigation of Donald Trump.
I want to also turn to, obviously, some of the races that we're watching tonight involving Liz Cheney, Senator Lisa Murkowski. We know that these have been 2 very vocal Trump critics. And so, obviously, we're watching these results closely tonight. But how will their positions on January 6th and the former president factor into tonight's races?
Liz Cheney is just a litmus test tonight on January 6th among the Republican base voters. I mean, it's just a straight up or down vote on her and almost clearly defined by January 6th and her role in the committee. Lisa Murkowski, you recall 12 years ago, climbed this mountain by winning a write-in campaign because she lost her primary. This might be less of a steep mountain tonight just because of her vote on the impeachment.
My colleague, congressional correspondent Scott McFarland, thanks so much for being with us. Joining us now are Leslie Sanchez and Joel Payne. Leslie is a CBS News political analyst and Republican strategist. Joel is a CBS News political contributor and a Democratic strategist. Leslie, I want to start with you. The January 6th investigation is one of many involving the former president. There's now a lot of attention, of course, on this FBI search at his Mar-a-Lago home last week. Do you expect that to have any bearing on the races tonight?
Not on the races tonight, Nicole. That's, I think, going to be baked in so far. But just the aura around Trump and the focus around Trump continues to drive engagement and intensity for Republican primary voters. They are watching what's happening. And if anything, it is a motivator to get out in the primary, find the slate of candidates they like, and look at the majority Republican legislature in the fall of starting next year, assuming big victories. That's the chatter. That's the focus. And if anything, it's one of the few things that Republicans are aligned on.
Joel, Wyoming's Liz Cheney had a staunchly conservative record, voting with former President Trump nearly 93% of the time. Yet conservative voters don't seem to be coming out in support of her. She's even courting Democrats. So why is that? And do you think it'll make a difference?
Well, Leslie is nice enough to let me cosplay as a Republican analyst right now. I guess what I would say when I'm kind of looking at this from the other side of the aisle is a couple things. One, Republican, the test of whether or not you're Republican enough is not about your voting record per se. It's not about your record on taxes. It's not about your record on life. I mean, yes, those things matter, but that's not the ultimate fault line in the Republican Party. It's democracy issues. It's whether or not you're Trumpy enough and whether or not you want to own the libs. Liz Cheney's on the other side of that. And, you know, it's interesting. I was talking to, believe it or not, I've got Republican friends. I've got a good Republican friend who worked for a number of years in senior leadership in Congress. And we were talking about just the transition of the Republican Party right now. And he made a really good point. If you're Liz Cheney, why do you want to represent the Republican Party of Wyoming in Congress? You have nothing in common with them right now. I mean, again, yes, you have these traditionally conservative values, but they don't want you. And frankly, you don't really want allegiance with them. So it poses the question to me, does Liz Cheney actually have a party right now? She's never going to go and be a pro-Biden Democrat. And certainly there's no home for her in the Republican Party. And I'm sure there are a lot of Republicans like Liz Cheney who are kind of dealing with this same conundrum right now.
Leslie, what do you say to that?
I think there's a lot of transformation in the Republican Party. She represents a lost era, quite frankly. If you look at the people that are decrying the loss and the 20-point disadvantage Liz Cheney has, they're not Republicans. They are Democrats. They are independents. They hearken back to a time that the Republican Party looked like Dick Cheney, George Bush, the former dynasties. They would call it establishment Republican. This new line, from the Freedom Caucus to the Tea Party to the Trumpism, or any way you want, has been building for decades. And this is someone who is completely out of touch with the mainstream of where this party is and where it sees itself going. And that's why I think a lot of voters are really frustrated with her actions on the January 6th Select Committee. They very much feel that they were talking down to the voters as if they were not informed on what happened on January 6th. This is their words, not mine. And so I feel that's the friction. And just to add to a point that we heard earlier real quickly, we talked about McCarthy being in Wyoming, raising money. Republicans are looking at wins and losses. Who is winning? Who can win? That's where the dollars are flowing. And those are the people that are in the room.
And Joel, I want to turn back to you. Do Democrats see pro-Trump candidates as weaker in the general election?
I think it depends on where you are, right? So look, Harriet Hageman, if she prevails tonight, you know, Democrats not going to be able to successfully challenge her. But you look at the DCCC, right, and some of these Democratic political committees trying to set up the most Trumpy or the most conservative candidate in some of these places. The reason why they're doing that is because they are better general election candidates to face. If you're in Michigan, you'd rather face the Trump loyalist than Peter Meyer, right? If you are in Washington State, you'd rather face the Trump loyalist Dan Kent than Jamie Herrera Butler. Those are just the raw realities of politics. So it depends on where you are. Wyoming tonight, No. In some of those other places that are a bit more politically skewed and a bit more mixed political populations, maybe.
All right, Joel Payne, Leslie Sanchez, always a pleasure to have you both. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
Coming up, we're going back to Wyoming. Republican Congresswoman Liz Cheney knows her criticism of former President Trump could mean she loses her congressional seat. We'll find out what voters there have to say about their current representative.
Liz isn't here finding out what we want her to do. You know what I mean? She's not representing us. She's representing her own interests.
Liz Cheney has persecuted President Trump, knowing full well that the state overwhelmingly voted for him twice.
CBS News Sunday Morning with Jane Pauley on CBS.
You ready? A generation of kids opens up on CBS Reports.
I just want to be like a regular kid.
Their world, their struggles, their voices.
What if I was white?
A lot of people like to call names and make you feel ashamed for being proud of who you are.
Now streaming Gender.
I did not realize that you could change your gender.
Realizing how you feel.
You can be a boy, sometimes you feel like a girl, sometimes you feel like both.
Redefining who you are.
Identify as trans.
Gender fluid.
Non-binary and queer.
Is the idea of gender a thing of the past?
And to be yourself, always, no matter what anyone says, I love you.
Are the kids all right? Gender. Now streaming on the free CBS News app.
I'm Norah O'Donnell in our nation's capital. We're here at the White House with the President of the United States.
Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
We've never done an interview like this before.
That's correct.
Tonight, a congressional investigation sparked by reporting from CBS News. What's your message to consumers? They need help now. Tell him I feel it.
The CBS Evening News with Norah O'Donnell from Washington, D.C. on CBS and streaming on Paramount Plus.
We will witness yet another moment in history.
Want to go someplace new? Yeah, you do.
See something new.
Learn something new.
Meet someone new. Nate B in the house.
There's always something new under the sun.
CBS Mornings, weekdays.
When weather is about to get extreme.
We're talking about hail, we're talking about tornadoes, damaging winds.
Every second counts.
Let's now take a look at what that really means to you.
That's why CBS News and the Weather Channel have come together to bring you virtual weather technology so advanced, so real.
We can show you what it's going to look like when the storms come through.
You'll see what will happen, where it will happen, before it does. Feel the forecast on CBS News. Time to get prepared.
People from every corner of America facing challenges.
Everyone is just looking for some type of connection.
Just raise your hand and say, hey, I'd like to help.
Coming together to find solutions.
We are going to do something about it.
Their stories are our stories.
Welcome to Eye on America.
Stream now on the free CBS News app.
CBS News Sunday Morning with Jane Pauley on CBS.
We have an inspiring story that started with a strange act of kindness.
Yeah. We found it.
You're kidding me!
We got it.
We share stories that lift you up and brighten your day.
The Uplift. Stream on the free CBS News app.
Stories that inform, inspire, and brighten your day.
I've been waiting patiently for something like this.
Make every day a little more like Sunday morning.
Here comes the sun.
Stream on the free CBS News app Tuesday mornings.
Too many people now in the Republican Party who are not taking their responsibility seriously and who have pledged their allegiance and loyalty to Donald Trump. I mean, it is fundamentally antithetical. It is contrary to everything conservatives believe to embrace a personality cult. And yet, that is what so many in my party are doing today.
That was our Robert Costa speaking with Congresswoman Liz Cheney about the influence of former President Trump on the GOP. We want to go back to Wyoming now to discuss more about the primary there. Bob?
Nicole, thank you. I'm here with Paul Kane, the esteemed columnist from the Washington Post. Paul, great to have you here in beautiful Jackson, Wyoming. Let's begin with that moment. You and I were both there when Congresswoman Cheney arrived at the polling place alongside her father, Vice President Dick Cheney. You've covered her and him for a long time. What was your impression of that moment?
That moment was really fascinating because he was trying to stay out of the picture.
He was.
He was trying to give her this moment. And she said, "Stand with me, Father." And he said, "Well, I had to ask permission." And she said, "Oh, I know." And so this is an election in which she has fully stepped out of her father's shadow. She has become her own force in Republican politics, in national politics. And, we don't expect her to win tonight. It could be a really ugly finish. But what she was saying to us when we talked to her was it was about the future. This is the beginning of the battle for democracy and fighting Trump.
And you asked her a question. You said, Congresswoman, to paraphrase the great Paul Kane here, you said, hey, you could have run a race that was local, all about Wyoming, but instead you ran a race that focused on national issues. And you asked her point blank, do you have any regrets? And she said,
no, none. She has been advised plenty of times by friends, by supporters, by staff that she could, if she had run a race that just talked about all she's done for Wyoming, for the energy industry, and for conservation, the battle between left and right, and sort of threading that needle. She's done a lot for Wyoming, and she could have tried to run a race like that, but she didn't want to. She wanted to run full force right into Trump and make him and the battle for autocracy versus democracy the centerpiece of her campaign. It probably drove away Republican voters here who might have been inclined, who might have given her a chance if it was about Wyoming. And instead, she made it about Trump. That helped bring out some of these Democrats from around here in Jackson. There's a lot of liberals for Liz, but it drove away some of the Republicans. But she has no regrets.
What is it about the Wyoming Republican Party right now that's different? You think back to the 70s, Dick Cheney's elected in 78, starts serving in 79, ultimately serves until the late 80s when he joins the cabinet. He was probably thought as someone who was going to be in the House leadership. Alan Simpson, the senator here. It was a different kind of Republican Party in Wyoming for a long time. What happened?
You got, if you could go back 10 years, Mitt Romney actually got a higher percentage of the vote than Donald Trump got here in 2016. It was more that type of Republican, but there was always this really fierce MAGA. They became MAGA under Trump, and sort of a nativist, nationalist, populist type of movement. And they were just sort of kept at bay by these very conservative types. Dick Cheney is a really staunch conservative, but they were sort of kept at bay. And then Trump came along and just unleashed this sort of fury, and that crowd has now taken over the state party. The chairman of the state party of Wyoming was on the west front of the Capitol on January 6th with a walkie-talkie talking into it. He says he did not enter the Capitol, he didn't break in, he just got that close to it. But that's the type of Republican now that is dominating here, and they're close to sort of getting a majority in the state legislature of that type of Republican. And when that happens, boy, a lot will flip here in local politics.
Paul Kane, columnist, reporter for the Washington Post. Really appreciate you being here with us. And Jackson, Nicole, back to you in the studio.
All right, Robert, thanks so much. Coming up after the break, former Alaska governor and GOP vice presidential candidate Sarah Palin returns to politics with a bid for Congress. And Republican Senator Lisa Murkowski is being challenged for her seat by a Trump-backed candidate. We'll discuss the latest polling in both of those races. You're streaming Red and Blue.
It's a shame that the McCain-Palin campaign kind of had some shackles on me, not allowed to go rogue, because that's what our country needs right now, are fighters who are willing to go rogue and get out there and fight for what's right to save our country.
CBS News Sunday Morning with Jane Pauley on CBS.
You ready? A generation of kids opens up on CBS Reports.
I just want to be like a regular kid.
Their world, their struggles, their voices.
What if I was white?
A lot of people like to call names and make you feel ashamed for being proud of who you are.
Now streaming Gender.
I did not realize that you could change your gender.
Realizing how you feel.
You can be a boy, sometimes you feel like a girl, sometimes you feel like both.
Redefining who you are.
Identify as trans.
Gender fluid.
Non-binary and queer.
Is the idea of gender a thing of the past?
And to be yourself, always, no matter what anyone says, I love you.
Are the kids all right? Gender. Now streaming on the free CBS News app.
I'm Norah O'Donnell in our nation's capital. We're here at the White House with the President of the United States.
Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
We've never done an interview like this before. That's correct.
Tonight, a congressional investigation sparked by reporting from CBS News.
What's your message to consumers? They need help now. Tell him I feel it.
The CBS Evening News with Norah O'Donnell from Washington, D.C. on CBS and streaming on Paramount Plus.
We will witness yet another moment in history.
Want to go someplace new? Yeah, you do.
See something new.
Learn something new.
Meet someone new. Nate B in the house.
There's always something new under the sun.
CBS Mornings, weekdays.
When weather is about to get extreme.
We're talking about hail, we're talking about tornadoes, damaging wind.
Every second counts.
Let's now take a look at what that really means to you.
That's why CBS News and the Weather Channel have come together to bring you virtual weather technology so advanced, so real.
We can show you what it's going to look like when the storms come through.
You'll see what will happen, where it will happen, before it does. Feel the forecast on CBS News. Time to get prepared.
People from every corner of America facing challenges.
Everyone is just looking for some type of connection.
Just raise your hand and say, hey, I'd like to help.
Coming together to find solutions.
We are going to do something about it.
Their stories are our stories.
Welcome to Eye on America.
Stream now on the free CBS News app.
CBS News Sunday Morning with Jane Pauley on CBS.
We have an inspiring story that started with a strange act of kindness.
Yeah. We found it.
You're kidding me!
We got it.
We share stories that lift you up and brighten your day.
The Uplift. Stream on the free CBS News app.
Stories that inform, inspire, and brighten your day.
I've been waiting patiently for something like this.
Make every day a little more like Sunday morning.
Here comes the sun.
Stream on the free CBS News app Tuesday mornings.
Voters in Alaska are getting their first shot at using ranked choice voting. The state switched to the new system for general elections, including today's special election for Alaska's U.S. House seat. Former Republican governor and vice presidential candidate Sarah Palin is looking to return to elected office in that race. She's also in the open primary for the same seat in the November general election. The other closely watched open primary pits Republican Senator Lisa Murkowski against 18 challengers. The top 4 vote getters will be on the ballot in November. For more on this, let's bring in CBS News political director Finn Gomez. Finn, incumbent Alaska Senator Lisa Murkowski is one of 7 Senate Republicans who voted to convict former President Trump in his second impeachment trial. She is the only one of that group who's up for re-election. Do you expect that to factor in tonight's race?
Absolutely. She has been a target of former President Donald Trump since that vote and of his allies in Alaska. However, because of the open, nonpartisan primary system that is there, it actually benefits her. So it's really about just the top 4 vote getters will move on to the general election in November on that ballot. If this was more of a traditional primary, if it was like Arizona, for example, she could be facing a pretty difficult uphill climb politically. So the fact that she's in this Alaskan system, it actually benefits her.
I actually was going to say, I mean, if she survives this, does this more or less make her the anomaly, considering what we've seen in terms of House Republicans who voted to impeach and have either lost their seats or retired in many cases?
Yeah, absolutely, Nicole, especially if you compare it to Cheney in Wyoming. I mean, she could absolutely win come November. I mean, most polling in Alaska is a very different difficult state to poll in, does show that she has a pretty small lead ahead of Kelly Tshibaka, who is backed by Trump and her closest rival in that primary race.
And then let's talk about Sarah Palin. Of course, a lot of discussion about her as well in terms of this congressional seat. I know you once covered her when she was running.
I was on her plane. That's right.
When she was running for the vice presidential nomination. So, just explain. I mean, it's been a while since she's been in politics. Why is she looking to get back in the game?
The timing is right. And if you remember, Palin was really the precursor to Trump in a lot of ways with this conservative populism that's really embodied his initial 2016 run. I mean, a lot of that there was a prelude to that. It was Palin. So now that she's got the backing of the former President Donald Trump, his allies in Alaska. However, though, if you look at this vote, her Republican challenger, Dan Begich, is actually someone who's been endorsed by the Alaska GOP party, while she has been endorsed by Trump and his MAGA allies. So again, it's putting sort of this collision, if you will, between the traditional Republican forces and Trump's MAGA base.
Yeah, Nick Begich, and of course, also a Democrat in that race
Mary
as well.
Patola.
Yep,
yeah.
So a lot to watch tonight. Vin Gomez, thanks so much. We want to turn now to Lana Zach and Anthony Salvanto for a look ahead to November's midterm elections. Lana?
Hey there, Nicole. It's always so interesting, not only looking at how these races are shaping up or who's going to ultimately end up controlling the House and the Senate, but what it says about our country. So, Anthony, what are we learning about the issues that are most important to people?
So tonight we're talking a lot about these fights within the Republican Party, right? Now, Republicans probably don't want this to necessarily be an election about Donald Trump or even about the Republican Party and its direction. They want it to be about how things in the country are going because they're winning those voters who say that things are going badly. And one of the big things on this, one of the big drivers of this...
Let me guess, economy?
The economy.
Yeah.
And inflation specifically, right? We've seen as people are affected by it, as they're paying more at the gas pump, those are all things that lead them to either, and this is important, it's not that they're switching over to Republicans. It's that a lot of Democrats are kind of staying home. They're less enthusiastic about voting. And that's one of the dynamics that right now is helping the Republicans in that national push to...
So let's talk about the issues that voters are identifying as very important to them.
Well, one of the things that really caught our eye is first you look at everybody. What's very important? And we should point out for everybody, you can pick multiple ones, right?
Okay.
A lot of things can be important. But the economy comes out on top, and inflation specifically, like we just said. But there is another wrinkle here. And that is that when you look at the people who say that inflation is very important, here again, the Republicans are winning those voters, right? So this is something, and this poll, I should say, was done before the passage of the new legislation. Maybe, and this is one of the key things to watch, maybe the Democrats can move the needle a little bit on this after that legislation. I think that's going to be one of the key things.
Very interesting. Let's also look at Roe versus Wade and the effect of the Supreme Court's decision and subsequent states repealing the ability to have abortions. What do we see happening then with voters on that issue?
So one key group I want to look at right here is women under 50 who, and we just looked at the slides that everybody's saying the economy was important, but look at where the abortion issue rises up to
just
basically
above
match.
Right.
Yeah, basically match
within polling error.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, definitely. It's all within the margin of error for these. So they're effectively tied on importance of this issue. Well, what does that tell you? Well, it means the Democrats, and we're seeing this already in some campaign ads, are going to start talking about that, start trying to motivate their base because they need to win women by wide margins.
And that always goes to the big question, which is who's going to ultimately decide these issues, control of the House and Senate, and what are we seeing in that? Yeah.
So a couple of things. One is on the House, just to give people the big picture, this is where it stands at the moment. And our latest estimate, which again was done, I'm going to say it was done a couple of weeks ago. But what we see is the Republicans at the moment with the odds to take the House, albeit not with a huge gain. This would be less than the recent historical average.
So not a wave that we see often in the midterms, but certainly with control, the ability to determine much of what happens in this country. All right, Anthony, I could continue talking to you all night. We'll continue to dig deeper into this. Thank you. We have to take a short break, but there is so much more ahead. You are streaming Red and Blue.
CBS News Sunday Morning with Jane Pauley on CBS.
You ready? A generation of kids opens up on CBS Reports.
I just want to be like a regular kid.
Their world, their struggles, their voices.
What if I was white?
A lot of people like to call names and make you feel ashamed for being proud of who you are.
Now streaming Gender.
I did not realize that you could change your gender.
Realizing how you feel.
You can be a boy, sometimes you feel like a girl, sometimes you feel like both.
Redefining who you are.
Identify as trans.
Gender fluid.
Non-binary and queer.
Is the idea of gender a thing of the past?
And to be yourself, always, no matter what anyone says, I love you.
Are the kids all right? Gender. Now streaming on the free CBS News app.
I'm Norah O'Donnell in our nation's capital. We're here at the White House with the President of the United States.
Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
We've never done an interview like this before.
That's correct.
Tonight, a congressional investigation sparked by reporting from CBS News.
What's your message to consumers?
They need help now. Tell him I feel it.
The CBS Evening News with Norah O'Donnell from Washington, D.C. on CBS and streaming on Paramount Plus.
We will witness yet another moment in history.
Want to go someplace new? Yeah, you do.
See something new.
Learn something new.
Meet someone new.
Nate B in the house.
There's always something new under the sun.
CBS Mornings, weekdays.
When weather is about to get extreme.
We're talking about hail, we're talking about tornadoes, damaging winds.
Every second counts.
Let's now take a look at what that really means to you.
That's why CBS News and the Weather Channel have come together to bring you virtual weather technology so advanced, so real.
We can show you what it's going to look like when the storms come through.
You'll see what will happen, where it will happen, before it does. Feel the forecast on CBS News. Time to get prepared.
People from every corner of America facing challenges.
Everyone is just looking for some type of connection.
Just raise your hand and say, hey, I'd like to help.
Coming together to find solutions.
We are going to do something about it.
Their stories are our stories.
Welcome to Eye on America.
Stream now on the free CBS News app.
CBS News Sunday Morning with Jane Pauley on CBS.
We have an inspiring story that started with a strange act of kindness.
We found it.
You're kidding me?
We got it.
We share stories that lift you up and brighten your day.
The Uplift. Stream on the free CBS News app.
Stories that inform, inspire, and brighten your day.
I've been waiting patiently for something like this.
Make every day a little more like Sunday morning.
Here comes the sun.
Stream on the free CBS News app Tuesday mornings.
The results of tonight's primaries in both Wyoming and Alaska will be a bellwether for how many Republicans feel about January 6th and former President Donald Trump. For some final thoughts on these key races, let's bring back our team. Bob Costa, let's start with you out in Jackson, Wyoming.
Final thought tonight. The race may be ending in the primary, but the fight for the future of the Republican Party is far from over. Cheney might run for president in 2024. So might former President Donald Trump. And the dynamics driving this race will continue to dominate the Republican Party as it figures out where it wants to go and whom they want to lead it. Nicole?
Ed?
Well, with all the focus on Wyoming, let's worry about Alaska for a second. The thought that Sarah Palin, the former vice presidential nominee, once the governor of that state, may soon be headed to Congress if she prevails tonight in a special election. We won't know the results, of course, for a few days. But what would a Sarah Palin in the House of Representatives be like? Could she build her own power center? Will she defer to leadership? This is somebody who's never been a legislator before. She's been an executive. She was nearly a heartbeat away from the presidency. And she's replacing the late Don Young, who, of course, held the seat for more than 40 years. So she'd have huge shoes to fill if she becomes a member of Congress. Again, we won't know the results from Alaska for a few more days.
And turning to my congressional colleague, Scott McFarlane, your thoughts?
One big number is jumping out at me. 10 House Republicans voted to impeach Donald Trump. It's likely only 2 of them return next year. Neither has been particularly vocal about that vote. In 2023, the impeachment coalition among House Republicans will, for all intents and purposes, have vanished. We'll see what consequences that has.
Leslie Sanchez, your thoughts?
The Republican Party is increasingly working class and looking for individuals and rewarding a lot of these primaries candidates that will protect their way of life. They want fighters. It's a different model for the Republican Party, and they will continue to move forward as we get through these midterm elections.
And Joel, you get to close us out.
What a treat. I'm a Senate guy, and I'm going to stay on brand. The world's greatest deliberative body, which has become more radicalized in recent years when you look at some of the members who have won primaries and went on to win general. In Alaska tonight, you've got Lisa Murkowski, who's a scion of the middle in the Republican Party. Can she hold on? If she doesn't, what does that mean for the ability to get things done in the Senate, where it relies on folks in the middle, moderates like Joe Manchin, Susan Collins, Lisa Murkowski? They're looking at another one of their members of their cohort, possibly up against it politically tonight.
And Ed, even though I know it's going to take a while for some of these results to come in, where do we go from here?
Well, you know, after tonight, essentially, we're waiting for New York and New Hampshire, and then basically the table's set. And we've seen in recent weeks Democrats perhaps feeling a little more hopeful or enthusiastic about their chances, especially in a lot of those key Senate races that Joel worries about. The president is set to begin selling all the legislation that's been passed this summer in hopes of turning his numbers around. What would that do to scramble the race? And if economic conditions remain as they are, does that benefit Republicans or Democrats? I don't know. You know, we'll have to wait and see. I'd say one other thing, to Scott's point earlier about these 10 House Republicans. Isn't it fascinating that of the two who have prevailed, they prevailed in ranked choice voting or jungle primaries, not the more traditional closed or open primaries that pit two people against each other. And that may ultimately save Lisa Murkowski, as it did 6 years ago in Alaska, because they have such a different way of doing things up there as well. What would that do to perhaps promote the use of ranked choice voting that we've seen in a lot of municipal and now some congressional races across the country?
Yeah, it does seem to be catching on a little bit.
Right. Do we see potentially other states or other county or city across the country decide, you know, maybe that's the better way to do it because it forces voters to choose among consensus candidates? And what would that do to change our politics? Might not be bad idea.
Fascinating thought. Ed O'Keefe, as always, thanks so much for being with us. Bob Costa, Scott McFarland, Leslie Sanchez, Joel Payne, and, of course, the rest of our CBS News elections team. I want to thank you all. That does it for us tonight. We will have full coverage of the primary results all day on CBS News tomorrow, and we will have full analysis on Red and Blue at 6 p.m. Eastern. You can also watch previous episodes of the program on the CBS News website. Just head to cbsnews.com/redandblue. Thanks again for joining us, and have a good night.